Welcome to part 3 of the 2018 FBR Performance Series. Our webinar today is how innovation can drive sales and profitability. And let's start by taking a look at the results of the poll we threw up as everyone was logging in. How would you rate your own system on innovation? And it looks like the majority of you have selected good, so that's great that you're keeping up with your competitors. Innovation is not an afterthought. Some of you went with great. Another group went with fair, and it's a little slow. And fortunately, nobody has rated their own system as poor in innovation. So we're all off to a great start here. And I'd now like to introduce our panelists that are here to help us talk about this topic. So our 3 panelists today are Kris Antolak, the Vice President of OxyFresh Carpet Cleaning, David Mesa, the Chief Development Officer of Ballard Brands, and Jim Westover, the VP of Operations for Yogi Bear's Jellystone Park Camp Resorts. And here to lead the discussion for today is FBR's founder and CEO, Eric Stites.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, everybody, for joining us again. I know you've had a couple of great sessions already, and I'm excited to jump in on innovation. It's one of the topics that's near and dear to my heart. And when we went to find some panelists for this discussion, we went to our data and really found companies that were kind of pushing the envelope on innovation. So I'm really excited to hear what our 3 panelists have to say today. And what I want to do is the poll I thought was interesting. The results from that poll, obviously, many of you put good, and a number of you put fair as well. So it was kind of a split there. And if we look at our own data from the research that we do with franchisees, innovation is an area that typically rates low in our survey. And so it's probably one of the top 5 areas, the lowest scoring areas of our survey in general. So the black bars here represent all the data from our benchmark, which includes franchisees across over 350 brands. I think it's about 30,000 franchise owners represented there. But then when we contrast that with the companies that make our awards list, that top 200, innovation obviously takes a significant jump. So many more franchise owners rate it excellent or very good. So it's interesting, and we really want to find out what it is that makes those companies unique and innovative. I think franchising, just by its nature, obviously tends to be a little less innovative, built on systems. And obviously, when you're talking about a franchise network, it's hard to implement a lot of change very quickly. So we're going to hopefully get into a lot of those issues today, and answer all the questions that you have about innovation. And to kick it off, Kris, why don't we start with you and just have a little tell us a little bit about your brand and just why innovation is so important within your system.
Thanks, Eric. Yep, Kris Antolak, OxyFresh. We are still fairly young. We're about 12 years old as a system. We're at around 370 units, and from the very beginning, we're in the carpet cleaning space, and so our carpet cleaning technology, just the culture and nature of our business is newer and built on innovation, really. And so that's from what we communicate to our franchisees to our franchise development process. That's like our thing in our industry. So, it's bled into a lot of different parts of our business, and excited to share and learn from the other great panelists.
Great, thank you. David, how about you? Tell us a little bit about your brand and how innovation plays an important part of your system.
Sure. So I'm the Chief Development Officer for Ballard Brands, which is the parent company over about a half a dozen different restaurant brands, but 2 specifically that we currently franchise, which is PJ's Coffee of New Orleans and also Wow Cafe. As you can imagine, in the restaurant industry, it's about as competitive as you can be, and couple that with franchising in the restaurant industry. at this point, it is taking innovation in the product, innovation in the technology that's utilized to deliver that service. All of those components really are impacting the success of restaurateurs out in the world today. So yeah, so I'm also looking forward to talk a little bit about innovation within the franchising, and also, I have kind of a slanted approach to this a little bit, to more referring to innovation as it pertains to franchise recruitment.
Interesting. I like that. We'll definitely get back to that. Jim, how about you? Tell us a little bit about your brand and and how innovation plays a role.
Yeah, absolutely. Yogi there, Jellystone Parks has been around actually almost 50 years. I think we're a very unique franchise in we don't build a lot of parks, we convert parks. So it's a lot different than, let's say, QSR. QSR is normally, built from the ground up. So what we're charged with really is, one, getting you to turn your entity into our brand, and then two, our renewals are every 5 years. So we're being judged a lot of what we're doing and a lot of what we bring to the table. So innovation is key for us, actually, in quote unquote customer retention, which is with the franchisees. So we have to keep bringing in new ideas and new things in order to retain them, and then of course attract new ones. So innovation's played a big hand with our consumers because the needs are just changing. We kind of dominate the 35 to 44-year-old category. But our consumers are getting younger with all the data that we have. So how do we address that 25 to 34 that's more technology driven? And that's really what we've looked to do, whether it's merchandising, whether it's food, whether it's entertainment. All these things have kind of, are a part of our business that we got to stay up on. And that's why we've done a lot of investing and testing in those types of items. Just to keep the consumer coming back, because the longer they stay, obviously the better off it is for our franchisees.
Great. So what I want to do is just before we get to the next question is just remind everybody we will definitely have time for Q&A at the end, but we want to make this as interactive as possible. So definitely chat in or send your question in to us, and we'll try and address them throughout. Obviously, we'll try and get into a lot of detail on some of these areas, and so if there's any specifics you want to know more about, we'll try and get to those as well. So we'll address as many questions as we can along the way, and then obviously at the end of the call we'll have time for Q&A as well. So David, can you tell us a little bit, just specifically about some of the innovations that you've made in your brand over the last couple of years that have really helped? You mentioned how competitive the QSR segment is. What are some of those specific innovations that have helped?
I'll say, as of most recently, one of the more interesting, or say, from a franchisee's perspective, was the launch of one of our new POS that integrated our loyalty programs, our gift card programs, and also kind of our customer experience metric or measurement. And so via launching this program, one of the interesting things that I found unique, and even from a franchise recruitment standpoint, sharing this with potential franchisees really made an impact on them, which is as we are text messaging our receipts to our consumers, there's a simple happy face, straight face, and sad face that is asking the end user or consumer to select how their experience was that day, and if that is a sad face, the text goes directly to the franchisee, to their mobile device, that says, hey, someone is in your store right now that has had a bad experience, and that franchisee from their mobile device can literally call that customer. Hi, I'm David. I'm the franchise owner for XYZ location. My understanding is you've had a bad experience. Can you share that with me? And they get to talk directly with the consumer in most instances when they're still in the store. And then even further, after hearing the consumer out, they can literally credit back part or the entire purchase back to that consumer in an effort to satisfy them and hopefully give earn another opportunity for them to come back.
Great.
So that in itself, I think, has really made an impact. It's a means to utilize technology to improve our overall customer experience and satisfaction, as well as measure it.
Well, and I like your point about the recruitment aspect of it, because obviously when we think about brands being innovative, I think most of the time we think about, at the consumer level, and obviously you can get a huge competitive advantage on the recruitment side, making that information available to candidates. I know some franchisors are a little squeamish about, kind of giving away the secret sauce until they've signed the franchise agreement and non-disclosures and that sort of thing. But certainly I think, sharing some of those innovative things that you're doing really help you stand out in the recruitment process to candidates.
Absolutely.
Jim, how about you? You want to share, some specifics on some of the innovations in your system?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we've done a lot of different things. I'll be honest with you, one of the first ways we started to take a look at our brand in whole was actually through the Franchise Business Review Survey. The results, a lot of times you think you know something, or you have an inclination, and it's probably true, and some of it's confirming it, and then, some other problems are brought to light. So what we did is we set out to address a lot of those areas. So, our customer survey process was actually a little bit slow, and it was a vendor we were using at that time. So we switched to more of a streamlined real-time process through MarketForce with their survey process. So our franchisees have the ability to address their consumer concerns faster. As far as innovations that we made for our actual consumers inside the park, it was funny. We actually found a correlation between Wi-Fi coverage and how the consumer rated the park. So we brought on a lot of different vendors just to increase the Wi-Fi. And of course, things that come with that is programs within inside the park, like a text program, because one of our other bigger complaints is we have kind of, we have Yogi go out 2-3 times a day. And the biggest complaint we always got was, where is he? So it was kind of a text system based on an alert system. And then that's kind of evolved into, other things as far as, hey, we can push merchandise through this. We can alert folks of the events that we have going on in the park, because the longer we have them entertained, the more they're likely to, spend money at the park opposed to going somewhere else. Another thing that we brought in, and this was through our reservation system, was a site locking fee, which is not currently, you don't have. It'd be the equivalent of a hotel, you going onto a hotel's website and picking what room you want. And that's the ability through this locking thing. And it also created another revenue opportunity for our franchisees. The consumer utilizes it 30% of the time, so it really has worked well for that. And then, of course, we've introduced a new app, but really what the thought process behind the new app was for everything to integrate from our rewards program, our Club Yogi Rewards, which would be just like any one of your Hilton clubs, to be able to check your points, be able to redeem your points all online, make your reservation, a one-stop shop. Because what we were finding is a lot of our website is now coming through mobile, so almost 60%, and then the new parks with the new reservation system, we're up 75%. So we're seeing a shift in our model, and we got to continue to stay ahead of it. I mean, it would be the equivalent of back in QSR when before drive-through was introduced, and everything was dining, and then it went to drive-through. So it's just a shift. Same thing with pizza. Where you went from calling in to now online ordering. So you have to change your model to adapt for that, and that's what we're in the process of doing. So we introduced basically paperless gift cards, and everything's e-commerce that way, and everything kind of funnels into one and can work through. And then on the consumer side, it was comfort. So we have this term we call glamping, which is glamorous camping. So we wanted to provide an option for everybody to camp your way, because not everybody has the same idea of camping. But if we make camping appealing to everybody, to the masses, then you can do it the way you want. So we've introduced a lot of cabins. We've done a lot of the comfort there, just listening to what the consumer is saying. So the innovation part will never stop because the consumer continues to evolve, but it's staying ahead of these statistics and understanding what adaptation you need to make.
I like that Yogi tracking app. Where's Yogi now?
Exactly, and it really makes it fun for the families. And then on our end, the merchandise. Obviously, we're selling plush Yogis and we're T-shirts, so they may not necessarily know who he is, but that creates a memory. You create a memory, then they're more likely to go in your store and purchase something.
Right. Kris, how about you? Obviously, Oxy's in the carpet cleaning experience, and maybe not the sexiest business in the world. How does tell us about some of the innovations that have really impacted your business?
Yeah, certainly, it's a good point. It's not super sexy, so that's the certainly one of the challenges when we're in the franchise development process is, our developers, and when I was doing development day to day, it's pretty common to have the conversation about, I didn't wake up or out, one day when I was 13 years old and say I want to be a carpet cleaner when I grow up. So a lot of what we push and how we turn it into something that's desirable is pushing our difference makers in our specific industry, and a lot of that is due to the innovation. So we have, and we're a little more archaic than a lot of the restaurants and the QSR stuff. So to our prospects, the fact that we have real-time, true online booking is something most our competitors don't have, and the fact that we are, our CEO really pushes us technology-wise, from how we market to the way we run our scheduling center. All of those things are tied into not our sales process, and that sales process flows down to the consumer. Our main differentiator, I guess, in our industry would be the cleaning technology, and we use a very low moisture system. 90% of our competition will use about 40 gallons of water in a home, where we use less than 2. And that green feeling and consciousness is something that's really played, that's what we're founded on. And so pushing that out through all of our consumer marketing and our franchise dev stuff, we use things like a computer used to fill up a whole floor of an office, and now you carry one in your pocket. It's the same basic idea for our cleaning technology. And it took a while for that to catch on. That was risky. There's a lot of people set in their ways and just thought there was only a certain way you could clean carpet, and it's the way everybody's been doing it for 50 years. And there's just belief, and we just kept pushing that and advancing the technology in our cleaning products, our equipment, to make sure it stays at the very front of, not only does it feel good as far as an environmental thing, but it actually works, and it works better than the old way. So always continuing to stay on top of that is a big thing for us. And lately, the big challenge and the big push, probably the last 3 years, and I appreciate what Campground spoke to, is it's going to keep changing. So with our franchisees, Eric mentioned at the beginning, it's tough to turn a ship, with 370 units or 1,000 units or 200 units. But the marketing, when franchisees signed up 10 years ago, it was simply like, go home, sign up with Valpak, and you'll be fine. And getting, the 50-plus-year-olds to adapt to, you have to be doing pay-per-click, and you have to get online reviews, and you have to do all of these things to stay relevant today. is challenging, but something that we're doing, and that in our industry for sure is not even looked at by most companies. So we continue to try to push. Our CEO's phrase is change or die, and we're doing that almost every day. So it's something we're going to keep doing. And I've had our keynote speaker talk on this at our last convention, Walter Bond. He points out BlackBerry. BlackBerry used to be the standard, and they were one of the most innovative companies ever. And because they didn't continue to innovate, they basically don't exist anymore. So, you just got to keep doing that and always be conscious of it. And that's what we try to do every day here.
Yeah, BlackBerry is a great example. I think of, Blockbuster as another great example of, companies that just went away overnight, and just because they stopped innovating. And, we often think about technology when we're thinking about innovation, but it does obviously cover all sorts of different areas, from operations and products and just simple little things. And, actually, while you were talking, Kris, I thought about the Franchise Expo in New York, which is coming up. And, one of the things I know you guys do with your team is when you go to those expos, you're wearing your baby blue Oxy clean, basketball suits, or whatever you call them, your Superman suits. Yeah. And again, that's a simple little thing. Some people might not consider that an innovation, but it really helps you stand out in a crowd or a sea of, other franchise opportunities. Like, what are these guys all about? And, again, especially when you're talking about an industry that maybe not as sexy. I think you guys definitely push the envelope on that. Jim, yep. Any kind of innovations that you can think of in your system as far as that maybe not as technology focused, something more operational focused or product focused that, even a small thing?
A small thing, as far as that goes, we usually take a look back at the information we get from the field. It's just based on what the consumer's expectations are. We've made a commitment to get back to the consumer within a reasonable time, and one of the things that we ended up offering out of it was actually travel insurance. We got a lot of complaints just on, hey, they're following policy. We don't get a ton of complaints, but that was one of our main complaints was, such and such had to, get canceled, and they held me to, kind of the agreement that was set, and we got to look out for our franchisees. So we actually went out and kind of negotiated travel insurance for them just to have it. So it was just more or less to address policy. It was a simple thing to implement, and it's a basic thing that basically any travel company has. But we didn't have it at that time, so we listened to them and got it put in place.
Yeah, Eric, and this is David, and to address your question, I agree with you. I think when we think of innovation, I think we immediately turn to technology, and as I'm reviewing my notes here in preparation for this event, 90% of the things that I have down here are really evolved around technology. But really, when you think about innovation, it's really just about being different, right? Going against the grain, differentiating yourself between the others. And sometimes it may be, the opposite of technological advancement. And, one perspective that I'll say, and folks might have, varying opinions about this, but, years ago in franchise recruitment, for the old folks in the room, we used to have to print out the FDDs and ship them out to the candidates, and that's how we delivered those things. And then when we went through that iteration of finally getting it approved and legally to be able to disclose via email or other various CRMs, that was like, godsend, and it was such a great cost savings, and everybody immediately turned to that. What we're finding now as kind of what I would consider almost like a reverse in technology, but still innovative, is that we've gone back to that. Like, literally handwritten note thanking them for their inquiry, printing out a franchise disclosure document, maybe throwing a couple tchotchkes in there, some free coffee samples, and shipping that to them as part of the disclosure process has differentiated us from the other half a dozen emails of FDDs that they received in their inbox, and kind of put us a little bit more forefront for them.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that. I hadn't really thought about that, but you're absolutely right. I mean, sometimes innovations can be old school things because again, everybody's doing things the new way now, and so you go back to doing things the old way, and suddenly you stand out, and that's really what innovation is all about. It's funny. I was having dinner with my nephew the other night, and he had just had a big internship interview. And he was asking me any advice I had, and I said, "Well, did you send a thank you card?" And he was like, "No." I'm like, "Did you send a thank you email?" And he's like, "No." And I'm like, "What do you like?" Just a handwritten note, like you said, or dropping an FDD in the mail. I mean, direct mail still works certainly, and having that 300-page FDD sitting on someone's counter versus the PDF file that's sitting in the computer, but sight unseen can give you that competitive advantage. So let's just kind of shift gears a little bit here and really talk about again, we've talked about franchising is unique, and I'd just like to hear a little bit from each of you about how you balance that need of innovation with franchisees that I don't want to say franchisees are resistant to change, but again, many people buy into a system on day one, and that's what they're buying into, and they can be resistant to change over time. And so I know a lot of people struggle with that whole change management process. And how do you guys just balance that within your brands? And Jim, why don't we go back to you to lead us off?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you mentioned that about resistance to change. We always joke that the campground industry is about 10 years behind the hotel industry. So we see a lot of the innovations that we want to implement, but understanding the audience, understanding that the franchisees can only execute so many things at a time. When you're out in the field, you can basically say, hey, look, they got 3 things they could execute and focus on. What can they do? So that's what we try to balance. What's going to be really impactful for them now? What's going to make a big difference in their business that we really absolutely have to educate them on and get them up and running, because we know they're operating a large park, and they got a lot of different things to deal with. So the balance is it going to be big enough change? And then 2, how do we do the rollout, and what's the best method for that?
Right. Kris, how about you guys? How about, how do you balance that need for innovation as well as, not freaking your franchisees out too much?
Yeah, no, it is a balance, and we've seen it again, like we've mentioned. It's not just technology. I mean, when we started out, OxyFresh, we were 95 to 100% residential only, focused on consumers, and that worked awesome for the first 3 to 5 years, and it's still the main thing we do. But a lot of those early on franchisees, now we have a whole separate program on how to get commercial clients, and we have monthly training classes where franchisees can come out and we'll teach them all the sales techniques and et cetera. But when you have one of your early franchisees win franchisee of the year, and he hasn't done a commercial job in 2 years, there's got to be a lot of trust or a lot of data to make someone want to do something differently. So part of that's building trust, and as Jim mentioned, picking the major things, focusing on the majors, not making a change just to make a change, and really pushing those initiatives hard, building a data set behind it. So one of the biggest things for us in the last year would be, it sounds simple, but our franchisees, and we actually, even if we're getting into dev, use that in our item 19, but our franchisees that have a certain amount of Google reviews or more do substantially more in sales than those that don't, and like that was the defining factor. And so instead of just calling and begging and doing webinars, we have by sending out real data that says, hey, if your sales are, or if your reviews are here, the average person sales are here, has really helped. In we've seen it by tracking the explosion of people focusing on asking the customer for reviews and mentioning that's a thing. And so it's just picking, like Jim says, the things that really matter are really going to make a change. And over time, building that trust that, yeah, this sounds like a pain, but they were right last time. I need to do it. And as you do that over time, it becomes easier, but certainly never easy.
Right. David, how about you guys? How do you balance that need for innovation with obviously a large franchise network?
Yeah, Eric, I think Jim mentioned it, but I think it's worth reiterating that part of it, especially as it pertains to implementation within the franchise community, is ensuring that you're not doing too much too fast. And that's a tough call because, we're in the world of a competitive environment, regardless of what, vertical we're in. And so we're always wanting to innovate. We're always wanting to change. And sometimes we haven't even completely implemented the last idea, and we've already begun implementation on the next idea. And that can become overwhelming for our franchisee. And then secondly, I think, especially in the world that we're in today, where most of the innovation that we're doing is technology driven, and if you're talking about an emerging franchisor, they may not necessarily have a robust technologies or IT staff. And so typically what ends up happening is it's that, operations consultant or someone that gets tapped on the shoulder to lead the charge for implementation of something that they may not even be technically qualified to implement. And so I think that's some of the challenges that I've encountered along the way. Some ideas and suggestions for overcoming that would be to again, have a point person that's overall responsible for that particular innovative change. Involve the franchise community. Start off with a pilot with a handful of franchisees. Get those franchisees buy-in, get them to identify mistakes and so forth ahead of time within a smaller group prior to launching system-wide. I mean, I know those all kind of seem obvious, but I realize that in the world that we live in, and especially on a day in and day out, we're always being pressured to come up with the next greatest thing. And so sometimes it's easier to take that leap of faith and say, let's just roll the dice and get this thing going, rolled out nationally. And when there are issues, they're magnified that much more. And it just hurts you for the next go round, right? So when it's time to do the next thing, you're already empowering the franchisees to resist that change because they knew how big of a flop the last one was.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. No, it's ironic, as I said in our data, that franchisees rate innovation in their brands very low for the most part, and yet, communications is an area where they also rate things very low. And everybody, they want to be innovative. They want the brand to be innovative, but to your point, like you're rolling one thing out and it hasn't gone across the system, and the next thing's coming, and and then franchisees are like, oh, there's so many emails and voicemails and webinars, and I can't keep track of it all. Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know, Kris or Jim. I mean, David had a nice walkthrough kind of there of a rollout process. I don't know if you would have. I mean, Kris, you mentioned obviously the trust factor and data. I don't know what else you would add to that process of making that rollout phase, more, I guess, accepting to the franchisees.
I'm not sure if I have too much additional to lay on there. I mean, you want to be cognizant, as Dave mentioned, and this happens to us, and I'm sure everyone. You're rolling out, and you're 70% done with this initiative, and you're starting a new one, and it piles up on folks. But it's important to try not to skip steps. Not to say, hey, everybody sign up with this vendor because it's awesome without testing it with, the leaders in your system and different things like that. Because when you do, and it burns, it's going to take 3 to 5 rights to make up for that wrong, and that just slows the buy-in process down. So it is a balance of always trying to push everything as fast as you can because the world's changing so fast, and really being selective on system-wide pushes. And that's part of us learning. We definitely consider ourselves an innovative brand, but that is part of the pain is pushing things before they're perfect. But as everyone probably knows, if you wait till everything's perfect, nothing happens. So it's quite the balance, and you just gotta. It's a lot of work, but that's basically for our operations staff and even our development staff. That's when you really break it down. That's all we're doing all day is trying to push through the newest thing as fast as we can.
Yeah, no, it's true. I'm curious. Do any of you address, kind of the change management process during the recruitment process, as far as what it's like to be part of the brand and how changes are rolled out, different innovations are rolled out? David, you want to start on that?
No, absolutely. I think that is the best time to talk about any upcoming changes, but also to address that innovation is a competitive advantage, and it will always be one. And whether that's innovation as it pertains to our business model or our concept, or innovation as it pertains to the overall growth strategy for that brand, we'll make sure the franchisees understand up front, hey, this is our plans for your market. You may think that there's only 2 locations that are viable in the central business district of New Orleans, but we anticipate to open 40 locations in that area. Or again, you may like this aspect of the concept, but realize it may not always be that way. And again, it's really more about as you mentioned, effective communication, but it does help prepare them for the acceptance of all the different changes and all the innovation that is going to be they'll be rolled out in the future.
Right. Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, obviously we deal with a lot of clients that constantly talk about change management and franchisees that are resistant to that change and overcoming that. And obviously setting that expectation from the get-go during the recruitment process, and not that it cures all cases, but certainly to be able to go back to that franchisee a few years down the road to say, remember at Discovery Day we talked about this, blah blah blah.
Exactly.
Kris, do you guys, how much time do you spend on change management discussions during the recruitment process, before somebody becomes a franchisee?
Yep, I think David said it perfectly. That's the conversation. It's built on that's our competitive advantage. In our industry, there's a lot of ma and pa guy shows up in a cut-off T-shirt and jeans that come clean your carpet, and the fact that we are the size we are and have the marketing budget and all the different things that allow us to be close to technology and be close to the changes in marketing. Although things get harder every year, we embrace that, and we want marketing to get harder because as a group and as a whole with the resources we have, we know we'll always be able to adapt. And someone with, one carpet cleaning shop in a town isn't going to have those resources. And so that's the sell, and that's the truth to franchisees on that. And by doing that the last year or two, we could see a drastic change in the belly aching and the different things of, oh man, you got to change again, because it's very clear now that, hey, whatever we're doing today, I can almost guarantee you in a year we're going to be doing something else, but whatever we're doing, we're going to be ahead of the curve. So that's what you're signing up for, and that's the value proposition of buying with us, is that I can guarantee you it's going to change. We're not going to be stuck in our ways. We're not going to be, whatever it is, dumping 40 gallons of water or, booking jobs on an Excel sheet. We're not going to be that company. So, just be prepared. And that's definitely changed in the newest group of franchisees on, oh, are you kidding me? We got to change today. It's not as much of a thing.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Jim, any tips to add to that as far as just setting the expectation for, change within the system during the recruitment process?
Yeah, we do it up front as well, just because it is actually started, through our sales process, whether we're going out and checking out the property and letting them know it's going to be done. I mean, our standards aren't going to change. I mean, our consumer expects certain things for us, and an innovation, and it starts with our reservation system. So we want to get them crossed over and acclimated for that, and then. As far as the change goes, there's going to be some things that are going to change. The look and feel is going to be different because we're putting it into place for our model, and that's what we believe is going to make you successful, and that's the things that have made us successful in the past. So it's just getting them to understand that going forward, and then from there, after the table is set, so to speak, no matter what you're implementing.
Can you hear me, Mike?
I think you got to have a consistent voice for it. So. Whether it's your operations team or your marketing team, everybody needs to be on the same page and carry the same message, and that helps with the implementation and having the franchisees understand.
So this is Mike. I'm going to jump in. I think Eric might be having some kind of audio difficulty here. So while he gets reestablished, I'm going to pick up in his place if I can. And move to the next question and ask the three of you how you communicate the value and the benefits of innovations that you're creating as they're coming out. So what does that process look like? Who's involved in it? Maybe Kris, if you wouldn't mind starting with that one.
Sure, yeah. So to roll things out, we will typically lean on our advisory council on, hey, one, this is where we get a lot of the input on where we need to innovate. Getting that feedback from franchisees on, hey, in my market this, in my market that. Over the years, that's made us grow from just being a carpet cleaning company to now today we do hardwood, tile, upholstery, a lot of various services. A lot of that's feedback just from franchisees who are out there doing it every day. And so the more we can pull from them, we talk about all the time, a lot of our best ideas came from our franchisees. So getting that conversation going, and then during advisory council meetings, getting them on board on what we believe the next great initiative is, helps us a lot when we go market it out to the rest of the franchisee base. And then, we'll do an alert out to the system. We'll do a top story on our internet system. A lot of times now we're building short videos explaining what we're doing. It's a little bit of a shotgun approach with us of, we got franchisees that learn in very different ways and like different, some like the video, some just want to see an email. So we try to hit them all ways to get it communicated, and try to support, again, these things with, okay, we've had this many franchisees do this, this is what it cost, this is what it returned, and this is why we're telling you to do it. That type of format lends itself to more buy-in. So in a general sense, that's how we communicate and roll out things.
Excellent, thank you. Eric, are you back on the line now?
I am back, if you can hear me.
We can hear you. All right, welcome back. Sorry about that, everyone. I'm going to turn it back over to Eric to continue with the process our panelists have for communicating value and benefits of their innovations.
Yeah, thanks. I apologize for that. David, you want to pick up on that as well as far as communicating the value back to franchisees?
Sure. And as you can imagine, obviously, the old adage, "What's in it for me," is important in communicating to your franchisees as you're rolling out any new initiative. But more specifically, I think where I feel like we've had the best success or the least success has been in our ability to be able to measure the effectiveness of whatever the implementation or the innovative process or widget is. So I would recommend or suggest ensuring that your team spend some time qualifying that up front prior to communicating it externally, to ensure that they have a clear vision of what this means to buy into this new innovative approach or technology or what have you. And again, that goes back to just what's in it for them. And also, I think as part of the communication process, a couple things. Number one, the communication should, depending on, I guess, the level of innovation or how immense or large the project is, really needs to come from the top down. I think if it's not important to the executive leadership within the organization, it's not going to be important to the franchisees. So, and it also helps to reinforce that, the cohesiveness internally. So having that communication come out from the top down, I think, is an important aspect that can share to communicate the value and the benefits of whatever that implementation is. And then lastly, one of the reasons why I think that that's so important is because we also at times fail to communicate internally the value and benefits of whatever this implementation is. And it typically ends up being just, if it's a technology project, maybe the IT department understands, or if it's something that pertains to operations, maybe the operations department understands. But we should recognize that our franchisees are talking to many different departments or groups within our organization. So when they're talking to someone within the marketing department about a concern or question, and that marketing department isn't aware or can't address that question directly, that starts to foster the doubt and the negativity and the frustration and ultimately the acceptance of that new innovative idea.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I'm hoping that everybody on the line just made a note of that because, again, communication is one of those areas that always receives very low marks. And I think, for instance, a marketing change, some new widget from the marketing department that gets rolled out, marketing feels like they had all their ducks in a row and they communicated it out to the network great. It was tested, yada, 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 yada. But, the franchisees may be, they're not calling into the marketing department in many cases. They're calling into support or, dealing with their field support person. And sometimes, those two departments didn't really educate each other before that rollout happened. So, I think that's a great point. I always look for a couple of nuggets from, one of these sessions. And I would, just identify that as a huge nugget. David, thank you for sharing that as far as making sure that all departments internally are on board with a change or a new product or whatever the innovation is, so that, whoever the franchisee is talking to everybody's on the same page. And I also think that your point about having, the leadership on board is great, because I've had a number of clients that, a franchisee is resistant to a change, and they're, getting pushed by their field support person or whoever to make some change, and they just call the CEO, and the CEO is like, you don't have to do that, just do it the old way. So again, if they're not, getting that clear communication from all fronts, I think it's a huge issue. Jim, how about you guys? How is communication flowing regarding, kind of the value of changes and the benefits to franchisees, and what's the best practice that you guys have found in that?
Yeah, I think it's really important for the franchisee to understand the thought process that went into it. How you got to where you were, so to speak. From us, just like as the others mentioned, a lot of times it'll spawn an idea will come from the field, whether it's a franchisee or an operations team member, and usually it's our advisory council, maybe brought some to the table. Typically we test it out with the advisory council probably for a full season, a lot of times. So we go into our symposium, which is in November, and this comes into the communication part. It's first talked about there, and then we usually offer workshops there to kind of teach and educate on it. Now, I'm not understanding that everybody's going to retain everything right then and there, but we also have our spring meeting, so we go back to it again as far as what the idea is, what we're doing, what was the data behind it, what are the results that we expect from it. And we also have some of the franchisees that work with it kind of go through the best practices of what they did and what they experienced with it, whether it's a product or if it's a technology change. That way it gives more validity to it for the results. I mean, a lot of times when you're in a field, somebody will ask how so-and-so is doing, and you can say how they achieved what they achieved. So from there, the idea, you even need to follow back up with a webinar during mid-year to make sure everybody's on point with it. For us, our season's a little bit later, so a lot of times we'll have another webinar in June to cover it, because we still can maximize our opportunities then. And sometimes the franchisees just need a refresher. So it's just a matter of going through that process and continue to communicate the same message to them. That way they understand why we're doing it, what the results should be, what the expectations are, and then hopefully you're answering the questions throughout the process. And as others have said, keeping your team, and that means the whole support team intact with what's going on and why we're doing it. That way that message is being communicated the same.
Great. So I want to jump into a little bit more detail around kind of the financial side of innovation and change. And, obviously profitability is a huge thing. It's especially a huge thing for franchisees. And a lot of times when we're talking about these innovations, especially when we're talking about technology, there's a lot of cost associated with these changes. So, certainly there's innovations that require an investment that have a direct ROI link, and those I think are easy to demonstrate, assuming that you've tested it efficiently within your system. But then other times there's not necessarily that direct ROI. And maybe it's just a competitive advantage that you have to do in order to stay ahead of the competition. And, it may not increase sales all that much. And I just like, and why don't we start with you, Jim, on, just talking about, how do you really look at the impact of, the bottom line to the franchisee when we're talking about communicating and rolling out these changes, and kind of the differences between, something that obviously has a very direct impact on profitability and something where, it's a little bit fuzzier maybe.
Yeah, I mean, a direct one for us would have been, more or less implementing a new product, and that's going to be used, 30% of the time. That's very easy and quantifiable for the franchisee. But I think you're looking for more of, a change that you may not see over time. And in my prior life, I was with Brewster's Ice Cream, and one of the things we did was change up the menu board and pricing as well as sizing. So we shifted everything, and what we really needed to convey to the franchisees was, okay, yeah, they're going to purchase the smaller item more, but now that is more profitable, and over time that is going to net you this, and we really had to spec it out. We spent a lot of time doing regional meetings and follow-ups just to educate the franchisees on it. We did a lot with having them submit their data because we wanted to stay in front of it. And it really was a seismic shift for our business model, just because, essentially the consumer wanted to be downsized and pay a different price for it. Less is more anymore, especially when we're talking caloric intake. So that was probably one of the instances that I've been involved with that, you really had to hone in on the specifics of that, change. On our end here at Jellystone, it's the investment on, why do I want to add additional cabins for comfort for these folks when I already rent them out? Or, why do I want to shift from a seasonal versus, which is guaranteed money versus renting that space out? Well, the answer mathematically needs to be proven out that I typically get $3,000 for the spot, and now I'm going to get $8,000 because that's statistically what it's done, and that obviously is more profitable throughout the process. So even though you may be giving up the upfront money, the smart money is to turn that actual product over into the new one. So just a couple instances, where we've been involved with it, and then of course it really does take a lot of explaining with the franchisees, and once again, same voice, same message, conveying those thoughts and why we're doing what we're doing.
Right. Kris, how about you guys? How do you, communicate specifically regarding, profitability issues around certain changes that are happening?
Well, we had a similar one when Jim was speaking that it made me think where it might be too complicated to even get out on this call, but for our franchisees, there was a big faction that wanted to raise their advertised price because they wanted to raise their average ticket. And so, a bunch of them did. And we had to pull out data that showed, yes, I get it. These franchisees' average tickets are higher because they raised their coupon prices, yet their customer count's down so significantly that that's actually not a good thing. And they were stubborn, and a lot of our franchisees, would which makes sense in a lot of ways, would say, hey, the quality of service we provide, the benefits to the customer, et cetera, are not worth what we're charging here. It's worth way more than that. And it was just we had to have a lot of conversations, a lot of webinars, pull some data to show and prove that lower coupon price actually generated more consumers. And once they got the consumer, the average ticket was close. It was within $5 for us, which on $200 was insignificant. But you'd get 60% more customers by just lowering that price. And so I can think of many situations similar to that, but that was probably the most challenging, where we had a group that didn't understand their numbers, and we just had to really get on the phones and similar to what David, Jim, everybody's talked about, have the whole office really understand the ins and outs of what we were trying to say, so that there wasn't a gap when whether it's the profitability coach gets on the phone or our operations manager, that we're all saying the same voice, because it was it was easy to get riddled by the math, I'd say.
Right. And another nugget I just want people to make sure that they reference. I love the fact that you have a profitability coach within your system, or multiple profitability coaches within your system. And just a quick unofficial poll to people in the audience, just chat into the chat box with a yes or no if you have someone in your organization or multiple people in your organization with profitability in their title, specific to franchisees, because I think that does send a very clear message. I know a number of our clients have unit level economics coach or VP of unit economics, and I think that does send a strong message to to folks that, that's what it's really all about. David, in your organization, I mean, obviously in the food sector, there's a lot of innovations that happen that, you can show direct ROI, and others that, again, it's a little bit fuzzier. How do you, deal with that kind of impact on profitability at the franchisee level?
Yeah, what jumped out at me as you asked this question initially was, especially the age-old challenge that many of us franchisors have, especially the brick and mortar ones, is that once a franchisee is established and they're at that 5 to 7 year mark and they've just completed paying off their debt service, and now it's time to reimage, or it's time to reinvest into their business. And sometimes that's a tough sell, right? To a franchisee. And yes, there are statistics out there that'll show, hey, when you reimage your store, there's a certain percentage of lift and so forth. But more specifically, as we're currently going through that right now with PJ's, part of the strategy was, yes, communicating the potential lift, which is still a soft and squishy number, but it is, there are statistics out there that show that. But even more so is to communicate what happens if you don't. And so that kind of that approach, at least for us at this point in time, is starting to open some eyes within the franchise community. Because sometimes as you mentioned, sometimes there's not a direct correlation where you can say, I spend $10 and I'll make Keystone on that, and I'll make 20. But sometimes not doing it is I guess a motivator,
right?
As much as it is as justifying the ROI or explaining what happens if you don't do it.
Right. Yeah, we actually just wrapped a big project with a QSR client, and we were actually working with their franchisee association and did a survey with their association members. And, corporate had, I guess, quote unquote, promised a return on investment of at least 14%, with or a bump in sales of 14% with the remodel. And franchisees were saying that the bump was really closer to 5%. And so that was creating a lot of angst within the organization, obviously. But to your point, David, what happens if you don't? Obviously, maybe sales don't go up 14%, but if you didn't do the remodel, they'd be down, 10, 15%. So again, it's hard to, prove those case studies out. And everybody, I'm sure on the call, has lots of franchisees in their system that, are resistant to change and, have cases just like that.
Yeah,
and I think those are.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Yeah, because it is so difficult, Eric, because it may have been a 14% lift, but again, the concept may have been on a decline in overall top line revenue, and really they just mitigated the decline rather than there might have been other areas within the business model or the concept that really impacted that lift.
Right. Well, and again, going back to setting expectations from the beginning, franchise development folks, look at me and roll their eyes when I say stuff like this, but, setting, those expectations in the beginning and talking through exactly cases like this where, year 7, you're going to have to do a remodel and it's going to cost, in the ballpark of X. And there may not be a clear ROI on everything. And, just talking about, that's just part of the business. And, otherwise you see declines in sales. And so again, that doesn't cure all ails, but at least having those conversations in the beginning, you can always go back and reference those discussions and say, remember when we told you this? So to help overcome that resistance. So just shifting a little bit, I want to talk before we wrap up here about who's driving innovation in your brand. Where's it coming from? And we all hear about the infamous stories of products at McDonald's that came from the franchisees. Franchisees are frontline, and they're the number one innovator. So I would just like each of you to kind of talk about who's really driving the innovation within your brand, and how that kind of process works. As far as is there a lot of research that goes into it and testing, or is it more kind of softer, I guess? And so why don't we start with Kris on that one?
Yeah, so there's a few places for us. Our CEO, Jonathan, has pushed the brand to get to this point in a lot of ways. But, of course, we've got the typical franchisee came with blank. We learn from them, study the program that they're doing or outreach they're doing in their area, and then disperse it out. On our cleaning system side, our director of cleaning systems has been with us since we had 2 products and 1 machine and 1 service, and now we have 30 products and 6 machines that do 4 different services. So, there's a lot of pushing there. It's kind of spread out, and one of the things, we've been able to do is empower people in their departments to search for that innovation. It's kind of just expected from them. We have our CRM in-house, so our programmer, is constantly looking at things, working with our CEO on, okay, well, we're going to build this module this way, but keep in mind in 3 to 5 years, we're probably going to want it to do this. So it's just a constant in all the departments of, yes, get your task work done, design that ad, marketing director, do whatever, but also, part of every day and part of every week for sure should be thinking about what's the next thing we're going to do.
Great. David, how about you guys? Where's innovation being driven from in your brand?
It does come from a lot of varying areas, but I think the key thing, or maybe an idea that I could propose, is really to truly create an environment that promotes innovative thinking, and whether that is having a quarterly innovation meeting where employees and staff can come and propose, hey, one challenge within the organization, whether it's internal or external, and one innovative idea on how to address that challenge, and almost turn it into a contest. Maybe you have an award. We always have employee of the quarter, but how about innovator of the quarter? Whoever comes up with the neatest idea that gets implemented, and they don't even have to have all the answers, but at least come up with an idea. And then what happens is collaboratively in that meeting, there always seems to be a couple nuggets that really get presented that everybody latches onto, and they end up turning into semi brainstorming sessions, and then we build from there.
Yeah, that's great. I like that. Jim, how about you guys? Where innovation's coming from in the campground business?
Yeah, I'd say on the customer service end, I'd say a lot of that occurs through the franchisees, as well as the operations team, just observation and things that they're seeing in the field. As far as some of the, I'll call it, there's really a big shift to digital. And those types of things, I think we're charged with at the corporate level to stay out in front, because quite frankly, we just have more data than the franchisees, whether we're buying the data or whether it's just because we're plugged in all their systems. I mean, myself, I have access to all their webpage results. So we can see trends probably before they can. So we're charged with staying ahead of them. So that's really key as far as remaining successful. So it's the support team here, and then the customer service in the field. But the third piece is market research. Obviously, you guys know I'm huge on that. Going through franchise business review, we literally sit down and go through each category and go, how can we improve this? How can we make this better? What kind of changes can we be made? And is it simple? Is it something that they can execute? Is it an easy thing for them to do? So, we kind of approach it three different ways. I mean, we get the feedback from the field, we get the feedback from the franchisees, and then there's just certain things that we got to stay out ahead of in order to make our franchisees successful. And as I said before, we have a very short renewal process, which is 5 to 7 years. So it's absolutely necessary for us to stay out in front and challenging ourselves all the time.
Right. So
I want to add to, if I could add to David's. It seems simple, and I didn't think of it at first till David spoke. But he mentions creating an environment where that's something that happens, and without realizing it, I'm sure a lot of people have heard of or read the Traction book. In our office, we have our weekly level 10 meetings, and part of that is just putting issues every week on there, and then the team figuring out how to solve them. And that's not technology, and that's not something that might directly be thought of that, but it creates a mindset of, okay, how are we going to fix this? How are we going to change? And it brings the whole team into it. And so then after that, then they have to take responsibility of it. Oh, okay, well, this is my idea. And now we have to go and figure out who and how we're going to implement it. So that's a weekly thing that we do, that anybody really can, that might spark some of those thoughts.
Yeah, that's a great, again, I'm going to flag that as one of those big nuggets. So everybody should write that down. So if you're not familiar with the book Traction, Gino Wickman is the author. He's got a couple of books and a whole organization. You can actually hire a consultant if you want to take it to a whole nother level. But we actually use Traction here internally as well. And you're right, it's a great way to really focus on, okay, what are the issues, and how are we going to address these? And and I think it's also great because you can only put so many things each quarter on the list. So it really forces you to focus on, okay, we're going to just do these 2 or 3 things this quarter and get them done, and then we'll focus on whatever else the next quarter. So if you haven't read the book Traction, I would highly recommend it. I'm also going to ask you guys, put you on the spot with a question I just thought of, is any innovation or what's your most favorite, I guess, innovation in the franchise sector at another brand other than your own? And I'll let you think about that for a minute. I mean, when we think of innovation, so much innovation happens externally from industries. So when we talk about like Airbnb or Uber, I mean, if anyone had gone to the Taxi Drivers Association and asked them how to better improve the taxi service, they wouldn't have come up with the idea for Uber. Same thing with Airbnb. If you had gone to hotel owners and talked about, how do we improve and make the hotel experience more innovative, they wouldn't have come up with Airbnb. And these are obviously huge companies that just popped up literally in a few years and changed industries overnight. So, Kris, I'll put you on the spot first. Within the franchise sector, not necessarily within your industry, who do you think is one of those most innovative brands out there?
Man, you did put me on the spot there. Trying to think through this. I remember going, and it's not as innovative anymore, and it just seems like every day. But I remember going to an unconference, which is also a great place to learn and hear about innovation. There's a section they do every year where they bring in experts on where things are going with technology. And it's where I heard it, and it's when I believe it was Great Clips, and then Sport Clips hopped on it right after. Came up with the simple idea of, I can just go on my phone app and figure out my haircut, and I don't have to deal with it. And it seems like such a small thing, but for definitely my demographic and me personally, not having to show up and wait, not having to, call and deal with it, just being able to do it real quick on my phone. Definitely developed loyalty and all that sort of stuff. And this was, 3 or 4 years ago, and now everybody does it everywhere. But that was a huge thing for me when I heard it.
Nice, I like it. And for those
and shameless plug for OnConference. I'm not involved, but it is good.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Is if you're not familiar with the OnConference, it's put on by Lane Fisher and Brad Fishman, and they do a skiing event in March, usually out in Utah, and then they also do a sun conference, I think every other year. And if you, I think if you just Google OnConference, it will come up. And a lot of people make fun of it because it's like, not a set program and people are just going there to ski and drink and have fun. And, you raise a good point. That's where innovation happens, and people getting together and really picking each other's brains. Getting outside of your own brand, I think, is so critical to see what others are doing. And I would encourage you to do that at the corporate level, and I would encourage your franchisees to do that, and that at their local level is, get into, CEO groups at the local level where your franchisees are, and have them interact with other CEOs from other companies. Because again, there's so many things going on that are happening outside of your system that we can all learn from. So, David, now you've had a little bit more time to think than Kris. So what's one of your favorite innovations or innovative brands in the franchise segment?
I'll share with you that I don't 100% remember the name, but I'll share with you a little bit of the ideas because, I think that obviously a couple of the drivers behind innovation is one is to either make it more convenient for the consumer, or which I think a lot of us focus on is how do we make that process more streamlined? How do we make it easier? How do we make it faster? How do we more convenient? But a lot of times I think we miss out from an innovation standpoint of how do we make the consumer feel better about the purchase internally. And so those are some of the things, like for example, and the brand for I can't remember the name of the brand, but it was a pizza concept where basically when you ordered an entire pizza, you were shorted a slice. And at the end of the concept was at the end of the night, all these slices of pizza added up, and then they brought all the extra pizza to a homeless shelter locally, and that helped to feed the homeless. And so, again, kind of an outside the box idea, kind of the same thing, I guess, with TomToms, where you buy a pair of shoes and you get another pair of shoes sent off to someone in need.
Yeah,
I think those are some of the things that I guess come to mind.
Yeah, I know that's a great story, and I can't remember the brand either. If anybody in the audience remembers the pizza brand, we'll give a shout out to them. Just chime it in the chat window, because I do remember that. And again, small little innovation, but that can really make you stand out in a competitive marketplace. So, Jim, what favorite innovation have you seen in the franchise marketplace?
Sure. I mean, one of my favorite brands is just Chick-fil-A. Just how they package everything for the consumer, how everything's set up for throughput, and as far as speed of service goes, overall experience. Just one of the things I always witness, and they can literally knock out a lunch. I think the location that I'm really familiar with is, I want to say, in Frederick, Maryland, and they wrap around the building, and they knock it out of the ballpark every day, and they head out there with basically iPads and take the order down, give you your order number, and get you set to go through the drive-through. So they really maximized and capitalized on the throughput end, and it really nets them in the long end. And I think they're one of the first to do it, because now it's pretty common. Even when you go do a car rental now, there's somebody out there with an iPad or some kind of device to get you up and going, all aimed at convenience and speed of service.
Yeah, no, that's a great. I like it. So we want to open up to questions. I know we got a bunch of people on the phone and probably a whole bunch of questions that people have. And while people think of their questions, we'll go back, and Jim, we'll start with you. Just any last tip, anything we didn't cover that you want to share real quickly with the audience?
Yeah, sure. First, thanks for having me. Anybody wants to keep the conversation going, I'm on LinkedIn. If you want to go ahead and give me a look up. As far as message, I liken it to Apple, where in their marketing, department, they literally have simplify, crossed out, and simplify. So I think keeping it simple for the franchisees, understanding they can only execute so many items. We know it is to be operating these large conglomerates and how many different things that they got to handle a day. So keeping that to a minimum, to the most impactful items, with a streamlined and consistent message from your franchise support team, I think is what really nets things in the long run as far as innovation, and making sure the franchisees understand the thought process behind it, whether it's the profitability or whether it's speed of service for the franchisees. Let them know that you have vetted this out and your advisory council has dealt with it, and continue to give them the forums to be educated on it. It doesn't end with implementation. You got to see it all the way through the process, and even probably further than you think, because there's always going to be that last, straggling, let's say 30 to 10% of franchisees that, are trying to change adverse and are trying to get caught up on some things.
Right. Kris, any last nuggets before we open up to questions?
It's related to, a while back, I can't remember who said it, but it gets brought up in my office all the time. When it was in regard to social media, and we would show a video to our franchisees during Discovery Day that, how much that's, getting pushed into our world and how much that matters and all this stuff, because, a lot of older folks are resistant to that and say it doesn't matter. And so the speaker said, and I think this can relate definitely to innovation in general, is people always ask him, what's the ROI on social media? What's the ROI on social media? I can't track that, et cetera. And so his response to that was always, well, you tell me this, what's the ROI on your mom? And it's a little bit of a weird phrase, but it's, if you don't have, his idea is if you don't have a social media account, you won't exist in 5 years, and you won't exist in 10 years. And so there's not a way to monetarily track it, but if you don't innovate, you just won't exist in 5 years, or you won't exist in 10 years. And people used to be able to get away with it for, 50 years, 60 years, not having to update what you do. But that's, every year that timetable's speeding up. And so it's hard and it's not fun, but you can't be resistant to change, especially in today's world. So it's do it or lose it, really.
Right. And thank you for chiming in that Rosa Fresh was the pizza brand in Philadelphia that started the homeless Slice for the Homeless thing. And that's not the brand that I saw doing it. I don't know if that's the brand you saw doing it, David, because somebody probably copied it.
No, yeah, that doesn't ring a bell, but that's good for them for doing so.
David, any last thoughts or nuggets before we jump to Q&A?
Yeah, just one, just a couple, but thank you again for having me and allow me to participate. But one of the things that I think that I know, and I share these because these are mistakes that I feel that I've made, is that as your organization evolves and through all of its innovation, is to ensure that the messaging and the documentation and all is consistent. So whether that's a small change within the organization or within the franchise operation system, that we're making sure that we're updating our operations manual, or whether it's some sort of outwardly innovative systematic change or massive change where we need to update our our website, and all of our marketing and supporting materials, our social media and so forth. So I think sometimes we end up confusing the consumer to a certain degree when we start innovating and we don't effectively communicate that. Yes, we might have a campaign that promotes this new this new idea, but then they go to our website and it doesn't really communicate that new idea the same way, or they might look for more information online via blogs or social media, and it isn't consistent. So just those are some mistakes that I feel like I've made in the past that I would recommend to folks as they continue their innovative evolution.
Right. So we'll open it up to questions. We got a few minutes before we wrap up here, and I would encourage anybody on the call that has any questions to chime in. One quick question, going back to the question of profitability. Just if each of you could comment on, I know a number of franchisors now, many franchisors have technology fees to help implement and push innovation. And just if each of you could comment on, do you have a technology fee or a related innovation fee, and how much of a percentage that is? So Kris?
We do. We converted ours from just national advertising about 8 years ago to national advertising and technology. So it's a mixed use pool. Our fee at the beginning was $0 because we didn't have one, and the national ad fee over time has gone from flat fees of 50 and 100, 150 to now it's a 2% percentage of sales.
2%, great. David, how about you guys? Do you have a technology fee?
You know, for our PJ's brand, we do have a technology fee now. I believe it's upwards to $225 a month. Now, that technology fee is also inclusive of their email and their internal CRM system, as well as their point of sale system to include their hardware. So there's a few components to that are included in that, but yes.
Gotcha. And Jim, how about you? Any technology fee on top of royalties?
I wouldn't say we have anything that's the 100% technology fee. We do have a 0.5% fee for Club Yogi rewards, and like I said, that's our member reward database. So there's management of that as far as the database goes. On the consumer end, we have at reservation system that we own 40% of. There's a $1 transaction fee for the franchisee, but most of them I would say probably pass that along to the consumer and a fee of like maybe $2.95 or $3, which is almost kind of like we kind of portrayed it to them as like Ticketmaster. When you go to check out, it's not exactly what you originally saw with all the fees. It's a totally different price. So just a little bit of that as far as the transaction goes.
Great. Mike, I'll turn it over to you for any additional questions we have from the audience.
Yeah, well, we're kind of right at the end of our session today, so I don't want to make people wait on the line, but I do have one question I'd like to get to, and it just kind of wraps everything up that we've talked about today. Each of the panels kind of talked about the resistance and how to deal with that from franchisees, but how would each of you handle changing the culture of a system that is not embracing change? So just kind of using that as a starting point, what would be the first couple of steps that you take? And David, I'll start with you on that.
So, again, I guess ultimately I would answer that is, I believe in every system, there's always going to be those early adopters that are on board just because the franchisor, they have that blind faith within the franchisor at that time. And so obviously, if you're implementing an innovative change, my approach would be to recruit those early adopters, measure all of the factors within that change as best as can be, and communicate those results out to the remainder of the community. And then obviously the expectation would be that the results are positive and that you'll have a great story to tell and create that story, paint that picture for the franchisees as far as what's in it for them, and use that as buy-in for the rest of the community to get on board with the change.
Great, thank you. And Jim, let me turn to you with the same question. Would you be taking similar steps in order to try to change a culture? Anything that you could add to what David said?
Yeah, it was funny. This is my third different franchise, and a lot of what he said is true. You get the early adapters, and I call it the 33% rule. So 33% adapt right away. They believe and they see the future with it. You get another 33% that kind of come on late, and then you always have those ones that are kicking and screaming. I think the key thing is to communicate. There's no such thing as too much communication. I think that's why we form some of the groups we do, some of the committees we do for particular projects. And you don't want to have it all a stacked deck. You need a good sample size that has different variables, different personalities. Some folks are going to be hard to convince, but you want to get them involved and get their input, just because a negative can kill a lot of positive things, especially if that information gets out there in the franchise community. So you really want to attack it head on, knowing that it's going to be something that you are going to be presented with. But like I said, same communication, the same voice, the same methodology, and making sure everybody's behind it will eventually. And I joke, sometimes you wear down franchisees. Sometimes they go, okay, Jim, I trust you, and I'm going to give in to this method, although I may not 100% agree. But if that trust is built, you will get to them and eventually have a positive change.
Great, yeah, that's great advice. And Kris, let's go to you to kind of wrap this up. Is there anything beyond what David and Jim talked about that you can suggest in order to sort of change a culture that's not ready for innovation and change?
They hit on a lot of great points. It's a challenge to change a culture, whether it's for innovation or otherwise, obviously. And so things they said, hitting it from the recruitment process on, but that's going to take time, in your system for that to grow. But something we've learned from our FBR results and just different things is you almost have to have two marketing companies or initiatives inside your organization of, okay, this is how we're going to market to consumers and franchise development, and then this is how we're going to market our own stuff to our own people. It's almost a full staff member, and it could be parts of many, but you almost have to put together a marketing program for the initiative if it's that important to you. And it's going to take a lot of thought. It's going to take, like it's been mentioned on the call again, everyone being on board with what this is and what it means and why it matters. And it's going to take dedicated resources to market yourself and your own initiatives to your own franchisees if you're already living in a culture of non-trust and non-change. And it could be a challenge, but you just have to, like anything, you got to put all you got if it's that important.
Excellent, perfect, thank you. All right, well, I think that is really all the time that we have for today, so I'm going to wrap it up there. I want to thank our panelists for another great session in the series. The fourth and final part of our series will take place this coming Thursday, 2 p.m. Eastern. We're really excited about this one. We have two pairs of franchisors and franchisees that will be on our panel. So we're looking forward to that and looking forward to seeing you all back there on Thursday. And until then, have a great rest of your day. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.